Welcome back to our discussion, What Zero Trust Means for the Federal Government, sponsored by Appgate here on Federal News Network. My guest today is Jason Garbus, the Chief Product Officer for Appgate. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. And Jason, let's talk about the federal government. That's our subject today. And tell us what you see going on with respect to Zero Trust, the scene. What does it look like across the federal government? They're all talking about it. What are they doing?
So the U.S. federal government has done a lot around zero trust and promoting a zero trust approach to security over the past few years. It really started most recently with NIST's publication 80207, which put in place a discussion of zero trust principles and a zero trust architecture. And since then, that's really kicked off a number of very active activities inside the federal government, culminating pretty recently with the Department of Defense Zero Trust Reference Architecture, the President's executive order on cybersecurity in May of this year, and then just over the last couple of weeks, 3 related documents that were published. The OMB published a zero trust strategy for federal agencies, and CISA published a zero trust maturity model and a cloud security technical reference architecture. And there's a lot of substance there. And the core of this is around providing federal agencies and departments, and as a secondary audience, private sector, a structured way to meet the mandate that was put in place in the executive order, saying in 30 days organizations need to put in place a plan, and in 60 or 90 days they need to have architectures in place. And what I really like about this is, number one, how much effort the federal government has taken and how much impact they've really had on the market. I mean, I talk to not just federal customers, but enterprise customers and customers in other countries, and they've really taken this to heart as well, looking at the federal government as a thought leader around the world. What I like about what these documents do is they really are recommending an incremental approach. They're putting in place recommendations, for example, that say departments and agencies need to have a pilot program in the next month or so to take one application or one system and take it kind of the first step towards zero trust. So they're really focused on things that are practical and can deliver immediate value, as opposed to ivory tower abstract things.
And this will affect users. So I guess I'm asking, who should be involved in the planning for Zero Trust? Is it strictly something that the Chief Information Security Officer and that whole channel deals with? Is it the CIO? But what about the business owners and the data owners throughout the government? Who's the team to do Zero Trust?
Zero Trust, when done properly, is definitely a cross-functional initiative. I would say the good news around the executive order and these structures are that in many cases, the CISOs and security leaders and departments and agencies across the federal government have already been thinking about and working on Zero Trust. So none of them that I've talked to are surprised or caught flat-footed. In fact, they look at this and say, this is fantastic because now this comes to the top of my list and I'm being held accountable and I got budget dollars that are coming to help me prioritize this. The way that well-run Zero Trust projects go is that the security team partners with application owners, mission owners, and provides them with a platform and a way for them to conduct their business in more quickly and as a side effect, a beneficial side effect, more securely. In fact, the best security system are the one that the business just adopts and users just adopt, and it doesn't get in their way, and it gives them a very strong level of security. And when it's done properly, Zero Trust takes them down that pathway. Should
users expect a change in the way they work, or is this ideally transparent to the end users?
I think the answer is yes to both, right? It ideally is transparent, and Zero Trust is all about, remember, securing all access for all users to all resources. And the experience should be, I turn on my device and I probably got to authenticate to something and I just do my work. And maybe periodically I'll be prompted for multi-factor authentication. We want to get users away from the notion of, oh, I've got to sign into the VPN to do this. Oh, I have to sign out of the VPN because it conflicts with that. We just want it to be, I turn on my device and I can transparently get access to what I want to do. Now, having said that, there will be changes. Hopefully there'll be beneficial changes that users will embrace.
What might some of those be?
Probably better performance and hopefully the ability to have a better user experience in terms of just accessing resources more transparently.
Because I wanted to ask you about performance, because the way it's described is you have all of these challenges and response going on, and there's this application engine running in the background that controls all the access and the context. It sounds like that would really slow down things across a network, but you're saying performance can improve.
From a throughput and performance perspective, a zero trust system should absolutely provide a better user experience than the VPN. And this is not just because VPNs tend to be fairly bandwidth constrained and difficult to manage, but VPNs also perpetuate a single entry point onto the enterprise network. So if you think about what a traditional VPN looks like is, I'm sitting in my office or at home, I VPN onto the corporate network, and then I've got to access resources that might be spread across a large geographic area. And now my traffic has to go across some enterprise network backbone, which is probably pretty congested and probably has a large number of hops. In a zero trust world, it says we want to provide what's called a zero trust policy enforcement point as close as possible to the resources that are being accessed. And we put the user at the center of the diagram. So now I have not one VPN connection to the enterprise network, but I might have 4 or 5 or 8 connections, all of which are secure, of course, directly to the enforcement points that sit in front of my resources. So not only are those pipes faster, there's a lot fewer hops in between me and the resource that I'm accessing.
And you mentioned a lot of publications that have come out, most notably NIST Special Publication 800-207. There's the DoD reference architecture, there's OMB strategy, CISA has things out now. From a federal employee, federal practitioner standpoint, do you see these things somehow blending into something actionable and that they're coming together in some coherent way?
That's definitely happening. They're definitely gelling. I was really pleased to see in the latest documents, for example, that the core principles outlined in the maturity model are the same ones that are used inside the federal zero trust security strategy. I think there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of refining this and building on it. And I think we expect this integration and this alignment to grow. I also expect that because of such a wide diversity of different agency architectures and agency missions, that we're going to see a really interesting kind of enumeration of different architectures and use cases. And I'm hoping that the government is able to continue being public about this and issuing documents and circulating documents that talk about, well, in this agency we did things this way and this is what we learned, and that one we did things this way and ran into this problem and this is how we solved it.
And Jason, AppGate has clients both in the federal sector and in the private sector. From what you can see across both, how harmonized is the federal approach with what you're seeing commercially?
We've seen some enterprises take as a similarly aggressive and forward-looking approach to zero trust that the federal government has, and especially in the larger enterprises, they've seen a lot of benefits from moving along this journey towards zero trust and performing what they might call modern workplace transformation or digital transformation, and moving toward modern authentication and a much more dynamic user experience. Other enterprise customers might start with a much more focused set of use cases, whether it's replacing their VPN or assisting in cloud migration or using zero trust to help accelerate their DevOps initiatives. I would say that certainly the vision for zero trust from the federal government is very broad and very all-encompassing, and we've seen, I would say, a significant minority of enterprises take that broad a view, whereas the majority of enterprises are doing it a little bit more stepwise and a little bit more focused because they have a shorter term time horizon.
And some organizations, especially federal agencies or more white-collar oriented, if you will, have a somewhat higher percentage of people teleworking in the post-pandemic era. I guess maybe it's not post yet, but a certain 10, 20, 30% steadily always working remotely versus just a handful in normal times. Has that affected the zero trust, the desire for it, and also the way you approach it, do you think?
It really has. And I think that not just in both the private and public sectors, the COVID pandemic has dramatically accelerated the ability and the necessity for these organizations to work from home. And I think especially in the intelligence community or in DoD, folks who are working on classified information, how much of a shift has happened in the last 18 months to support and enable remote work or alternate forms of working that were probably pretty unimaginable pre-COVID.
And from what you've seen, if you have a zero trust architecture in place and mechanism and something is blocked and alerts are generated, can the zero trust ecosystem itself almost be another source of early warning indicators of the threat environment?
Yeah, it really can, and it really should be. And if you think about the principle of least privilege, which we believe should really be enforced all the way down to the network level, states that if you don't have a need and explicitly granted access to a specific network resource, whether it's a server or a service or a given port or protocol, you have no business accessing it, because to doing so represents a security risk. So if your device begins trying to, for example, SSH to some system that you don't have access rights to, clearly that's anomaly, and it should be anomaly, and it should be followed up with some sort of investigation or quarantine or blocking of that device.
All right, so I'm a federal agency and I want to get going with this. How should I get started? What do you do first?
The good news is that the federal agency and the security leadership is hopefully already getting started. We've seen organizations that are the most successful that can identify short-term projects that deliver benefit for the mission of the organization. And these are very often, this is in fact a great opportunity for the security team to start to engage with colleagues across different departments and areas, and to identify points of friction or blockers that perhaps security and IT is putting up from an innovation perspective. So let's say some team says, you know what, we can't use this identity system anymore and we got to move over to this one, but we have all these problems. Or another team might say, we really want to start to move these applications and data up to the cloud, but the security team is blocking us because of this reason or that reason. Those are great opportunities for the Zero Trust team to say, okay, let's talk about how we can do this in a way that enables the business to advance while actually improving security at the same time. Security teams can also look at areas that are siloed today. One of the biggest benefits of Zero Trust is it lets you define a single unified policy model, regardless of whether a user is on premises or remote, and regardless of what type of technology or of resource they're trying to access. So if you have siloed access control systems or security systems today, Zero Trust is really good at breaking down those barriers.
So you should really spend some time initially on that unified policy, because that's what's going to drive pretty much everything you do with respect to the technology rollout.
Yes, exactly.
And is this something, by the way, just a quick question before we close, are cloud services offered by the commercial cloud providers, can those be employed in your Zero Trust system since everybody's in the cloud now?
They can, and they have some real benefits to that, which is that because they're modern systems, and because they're all software managed, by definition they all have APIs and they all have mechanisms for a Zero Trust system to very easily integrate with them, whether it's interrogating the attributes of the workload or actually driving configuration changes in those cloud environments. So those are terrific projects to get started with.
All right, you've given us a great roadmap. Our guest today has been Jason Garbus, the Chief Product Officer for AppGate. I'm Tom Temin. You're listening to Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, please visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search AppGate.